Hello and welcome back to the channel. 2002's Road to Perdition from director Sam Mendes is based on the graphic novel of the same name. A story of revenge, Mendes describes the film as narratively very simple but thematically very complex. It remains one of the very best adaptations of a graphic novel, and quite possibly the best in an ever-growing field. So let's take a closer look. The film begins in the winter of 1931. Michael Sullivan is an enforcer for a mob family. When his young son, Michael Jr., witnesses a botched intimidation, events spiral and the rest of the Sullivan family is murdered. Michael takes his young son and travels across the country seeking revenge against the venal mobster's son responsible for the murders. Plot-wise, it's a simple setup, but as Mendes observes, it holds with it a number of interesting themes. There is a theme of family legacy and a strong focus around the effects of a violent life on the young and if they can break free from such a cycle of violence. Alongside this sits an interesting look at what happens when a child steps into their parents' world fully for the first time. That phase of growing older when you come to know your parents in their entirety rather than just who they are in relation to you. The film is built upon a series of father and son relationships. We have the central pairing of Michael and Michael Jr., but also Michael's relationship with the head of the mob family he works for in Mr. Rooney, as well as Rooney's relationship with his own son, who is the target of Michael's quest of revenge. All three relationships develop throughout the film, with the biological fathers tested to see how far they will go to protect their sons, one from the literal threat of death and the other striving to prevent his son from falling into the same life of violence. And we see with Michael and Mr. Rooney an arc of a son stepping out from the protection of the father figure, much like Michael Jr. is learning to step out from the shadow of his own father. There are no moral absolutes here. Tom Hanks's Michael Sullivan is a deeply compromised man. He strives to teach his son to act morally, to show that there is another way, but he will kill without pause those that stand in his way as he seeks revenge. Hanks brings a sense of honour to Michael Sullivan, underlying it with a world-weary sense, whilst neatly playing against his persona as the likeable everyman. It is an interesting dynamic as Sullivan is no hero, but the film is told through Michael Jr.'s eyes. So despite the strained relationship between them, Michael Jr. still looks up to his father. As the film goes on, he begins to realise the flaws in his father and the ugliness of the gangster's lifestyle. Tyler Hoechlin is excellent as Michael Jr., a young boy whose transition from childhood to an adult world is sudden and brutal. Elsewhere, Paul Newman brings gravitas to Mr. Rooney in his last on-screen theatrical role. In his relatively few scenes, he builds a strong relationship with Hanks's Michael Sullivan and gives his mob boss a layer of regret of the life he's led, showing that even for those that succeed in this life, the price is high. Jude Law also here plays against type as a sinister hitman sent to chase the Sullivans, a sociopathic killer who poses as a crime scene photographer and finds glee in taking pictures of the recently murdered victims to sell to the papers. He represents a figure that Michael Sr. fears his son could grow to be. Our last main player is Daniel Craig as the venal younger Rooney, a cocksure spoilt bully who soon shows his true nature as a coward, and another possible future for Michael Jr. Each man, indeed, is a possible future for the young Sullivan, his father desperate that he becomes none of them. As Mendes noted, in this story it is what the violence does to the person who pulls the trigger and what it has done to them over the years, how it has gradually corroded them, it has rotted their insides. A critical moment coming when Michael Jr. must choose in a tense moment whether he follows his father's path or not. Indeed, scenes where Michael Sr. was going to speak about his background and how he became an enforcer for Rooney were left out of the final edit to leave in place a dichotomy in the film of a seemingly moral man who has achieved a comfortable status through violent means, all the while looking to ignore the damage he has left behind. It is a stunning looking film. Filmed on location around Chicago, Mendes made use of the real weather conditions, with snow, rain and gloomy skies matching the characters' emotional states, paired with a mute colour palette, and alongside matching the framing of a number of scenes to panels from the graphic novel. Mendes took inspiration from artists working around the film's time period, such as Edward Hopper. Combined with some elegant costume design, the whole film is given the feeling of a classic 50s gangster picture. If Eastwood's Unforgiven is a revisionist western, then Road to Perdition is a revisionist gangster film. In fact, the parallels between the two films is striking. Both stories of fathers striving to do right by their children, whilst facing up to the emotional toll a lifetime of violence has cost. And much like Unforgiven, the film presents its acts of violence as sudden and quick. Brutal punctuation where the focus is on the effects of the acts on those left behind delivers the consequences. Small touches in the cinematography are easy to miss but play a vital part. For example, in early parts of the film, we are very much watching through Michael Jr.'s eyes, and so his father appears obscured or seen through doorways, the distance conveying Michael Jr.'s ignorance of his father's true line of work, his true nature. Often, the elder Michael is shot using a wide lens, giving the character a sense of distance from the audience and from his son. The film's Academy Award recognition for its cinematography is more than deserved. Add to this a fantastic score full of pathos by Thomas Newman, whose heavy use of piano and strings produces a sense of haunting melancholy throughout. The film differs from the source material in a few ways. For example, in the book, Michael Sr. is a religious man who lights a candle for each man he kills who goes to confession, whereas in the film, Michael is resigned to damnation, more than aware that that is what he deserves. In turn, this subtly changes the dynamic between Michael and his son. In the book, father reassures his son that forgiveness can always be found, whereas the film's version is a father desperate to steer his son down another path from his own. Looking at films based on graphic novels, for me, only V for Vendetta, Ghost World and History of Violence are thematically as rich. But Ghost World could easily be one of many other American indie films. History of Violence doesn't quite land its themes nearly as cleanly, and V for Vendetta has a layer of artificiality to its world that distances it emotionally from the viewer. The film avoids giving us any easy answers on many of the themes addressed. Its closing lines of narration leaving us asking if we ever can really know the hearts of even those closest to us. Road to Perdition is a film I highly recommend. These days it seems largely overlooked and forgotten. I don't know why. For me, it's right up there. A soliloquy on the nature of violence, on fathers and sons, and that feeling of stepping from childhood into an adult world. It's by far the strongest film I know based on a graphic novel. Let me know your thoughts below, like and subscribe if you like my wittering, and I'll see you again soon.